Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of The Growth Show and The One Big Question. Today we're going to be exploring what creates grit. I'm delighted to be joined by Tom Pickering and David Berkeley. So let's get straight into it. David, what creates grit?
In a word, adversity. I think all teams and all individuals who've been successful to whatever degree have gone through a period of adversity, either individually or collectively as a team. Often in team sports, they say you've got to lose a final to then win one. A great example of that would be Liverpool 2 years ago, losing the Champions League final. Last year, coming back, storming it. Last year, they lost the Premier League, which in any other year, bar one in the Premier League history, they would have won the league with that points tally. And they've come back even stronger. So that's built an inner resilience from that adversity. And a lot of my clients who've gone through really, really tough times, I always say this is brilliant news because that adversity will drive you to become far more grittier and far more determined to actually get where you want to get to. For people who success comes too easily, it goes easily as well. And they don't really understand why they're successful. So I'm always wary of people who haven't had adversity because it hasn't actually built that fundamental grit.
Well, I think it's an internal thing. It is about facing a new challenge, but it's all about taking new action in the face of that challenge. And the challenge is, how do we do that in a way that's aligned with ourselves? So we actually learn more about ourselves and make ourselves stronger when we actually, follow through these challenges. So I think it's all about taking our own personal actions, and in so doing, we're learning more about ourselves and developing our capability, because we don't learn anything by doing the same things all the time. And so it's simply a question of seeing a challenge, adjusting, taking new action. And of course, within an organisation, you've got to create a framework to do that. So it's far from being straightforward. And there are lots of things. There's lots of fear associated with taking new action. So it's about creating the right environment to do that.
So David, if you have seen people who've been on an easier path, what sort of things would you recommend they could be doing to toughen them up, to sort of increase their ability to be a bit grittier?
I was talking about this with a client earlier today, and it was really interesting. I was talking about the first ever coaching client that I got, and it was in a pub. We were just having a catch up with a friend over a pint, and after half an hour, I said, "Mate, what you do sounds amazing. How much is it? When can we start?" The next 10 conversations I had were I then went to try and get clients. None of them ended in cash because I fundamentally didn't understand why he paid. So you've got to go through a bit of pain, as Tom was saying, to get to that outcome. And so if life's been a bit of a breeze and things seem to come quite naturally, pick something that might be outside of your sort of normal comfort zone, might be even outside of your business, and pick something where you're not going to be good and you've really got to grind at it. I did a charity boxing fight a few years ago. I've got a little trophy just by my desk. That was so far out of my comfort zone. I got into the gym. These massive guys with tattoos all over them stood around the ring. I was like, well, I hopefully these guys will finish up before our session starts. Turns out they were the guys we were sparring. And I had a headache for about 5 days afterwards. There's probably some concussion thing around that, but we'll park that. It's actually just putting yourself out of the comfort zone and getting used to being out of your comfort zone. And I think people all too often dip a toe out of it because they're not really committed to it. They're just interested in it. And I think you've got to be committed to something, really throw yourself into something where you're going to have to sink a bit to then learn how to swim.
And Tom, do you think now's the time to be putting yourself out of your comfort zone?
100%. I mean, I think it's analogy I'd use. I'm not a great sailor, but is having the wind blowing behind you for a long period of time. You just carry on doing what you're doing. It's only really when you either hit an iceberg or some rocks or something, you've got to change tack, and hopefully you don't get to that stage before you do. I think there's a number of things, flip side, that stop people from doing this. One is social media. I think social media is an environment which is designed to entrap us and manipulate us, and in so doing, it can make us very much more fragile. So when we actually hit a challenge, we haven't got that internal resilience or that knowledge of ourselves to really see something through. And it's that inner strength. It's not and I think that a lot of the social media stuff is actually outside in rather than inside out. And it's about, really knowing yourself when things get really difficult. It's about really knowing yourself, and that's about taking new action and learning. And people, but that's also about creating an environment whereby that's appreciated in an organisation. So another thing that I think that inhibits this is when organisations recruit for values. This sounds great, but in fact, I think it tends to put people into boxes and assumes that Nick's this and David's that, when in fact we're actually as individuals quite unique. So it's very important to know how to give someone something to do, give them the space to do it, know how to engage with them, to leave the ownership with them, to actually see it through. Because if you get that even slightly wrong, you can completely take away the opportunity for learning, and also speed as well. Because it's when you get this right, you get things done a lot quicker, and the level of motivation and the new launches, etc., and also decision making. People have got to be allowed to make their own decisions. Constantly coming to Nick all the time to ask questions. So I think that's the foundation of grit. And what that does is it creates a capability which enables you to, next time you face a challenge, you'll be stronger, and it actually builds capability rather than tiring people out. I think far too many organisations create a bit of a tyranny of tolerance, and it's just hard work. And emotionally it can be hard work. When in fact, when you get this right, it can be very invigorating, and people may work long hours. Not that I advocate working long hours, but they won't feel stressed or tired, because the reason why people get stressed, in my simple analysis, is because their actions and their beliefs get out of sync. And by realigning that and actually creating an environment whereby people actually appreciate that, then you're beginning to create a great, very exciting place to work.
And David, how do you help people identify or help them take those first steps when they realise they might need to sort of challenge themselves right now?
I think people often are in sort of three states when it comes to change. I think you're open, closed, or stuck. So you're either open to change, you're either completely closed off to change, or you're stuck. So someone who's closed, there's no point trying to change someone's behaviour when they're closed to changing. Like Donald Trump at the moment, there is no point in trying to convince him of doing anything else. He's just going to keep doing what he's doing. People come to me usually when they're stuck, when they've exhausted all the things that they would naturally do and none of them have worked. And that's when you need to start trying new things. And that's uncomfortable. And actually just having someone to help guide you through that can be really, really helpful. Often in a situation where you have to do it. So in this current time, a lot of people have to do new things because what has been working isn't working now. So I'd always encourage people to get into that mindset before you have to be in that mindset. So pick up new things that are going to push you outside of your comfort zone, so that when you then are pushed outside of your comfort zone because you have to be, it's much easier, because those neural pathways are already beginning to burn and form.
I think that's well said. I think it's very much about the way you give people things to do and make sure they've got the resources to do it. And that means also having the support, not just in their team, but also having the support of other people around you. It's almost impossible to do these things unless you've got support. And I think it's about putting other people first as well. I encourage people to put other people first, and that's a self-fulfilling, creates a self-fulfilling environment. So I think there's some really practical steps. And I think I always put a caveat in to say, look, if you get stuck, then always escalate. Don't sit there sweating. And then the challenge is, if someone comes to you with an issue, what do you do? What do you do about that? And that's where the where you have to be very careful how you steer, because on one hand you should clarify the objective. That's a director type role. On the other hand, you may need to provide some technical advice of some variety, or a coaching response, which is very much what David was talking about there. And it's about getting that balance right. And if you, at any moment in that process, take the ownership away, then you can really very quickly revert that individual back to what they were doing before, which is very, very sensitive balance. So I watch the dynamic of this very, very carefully, and I'm acutely conscious of what I'm saying, or try to be. It's a lot of it. I think I'd add to what David said around self-awareness. People are quite unaware of the implications, and for example, values-based recruitment is a very common, way of doing things, and people are very unaware of how that can have exactly the opposite effect to the one you desire.
Values-based recruitment is absolutely something we should explore, and actually quite controversial. So it would be good to explore that on another episode. But here's a question for you both. Do you find that people secretly work on their challenges, or are they quite open with their teams and inclusive to the challenges? What's your experience of that?
A bit of both.
Right.
As in, I tend to find the leaders I work with tend to fit into two categories. One, people who want to be seen to have all the answers, and have always had the answers, and now they don't necessarily have the answers, but they're trying to go and get them, so then they can present the team with the answers. It's not a great long-term success model, and perhaps we can get into that another time. But the other ones are people going, a lot of the tech founders that I work with have got a very highly skilled in a very sort of few areas. There might be brilliant data analysts or quant guys or salespeople or whatever. And suddenly they're running a company with a whole load of other areas and they have no idea about them. And actually, they're often, with the humility and sort of openness, they go to the team and go, look, I don't have all the answers. That's why I'm employing really good people who do. I'm just trying to guide and get the best out of everybody and help shape this and get the best advisors around, and accountability I can around me to make the best decisions that we can as a business. They tend to be the businesses that have better cultures, be far better staff engagement, and actually tend to be more resilient in change because they're actually starting from a place of sort of humility and are actually more comfortable in going and seeking help in the first place.
Absolutely. And what I see on a day-to-day basis, and especially in the tech world, is that everyone who works around those types of CEOs has an incredibly detailed job spec. Everyone bar the CEO, who is still pressurizing themselves to be this sort of superhuman master of all specialist. And the advice I always give them is just to step back and actually focus on them and their role first, as they are usually one of the biggest limiting factors to the sort of growth in the business. There's also that sort of culture of, this pressure they're piling on themselves to be this sort of 4 a.m. mega leader, which I think is incredibly restrictive. Tom, would you have anything, are you seeing that, anything to add along those lines?
I think we talked about this before. It's the expectation of a leader, I think, is fundamentally wrong. I think, MBA programs, the whole education system teaches us to know the answers to the questions. And I think very much when I jump in, and I do have a stupid amount of experience of a lot of different situations, but at the same time, when I do jump in, I find I very often get the detail wrong. And that's only because I'm aware that I've got it wrong. And I think a lot of leaders do that anyway, to the point whereby, they just, employees get quite punch drunk. So I think even in small organisations, it's very important, rather like what you just said, Nick, to make sure there's clear delineation in terms of who's doing what. But the whole expectation of a leader, I think, is completely, is wrong. And I think what the leader really should do is to be there to make someone has to make the big decisions. The challenge is at what level are those decisions? It's getting the granularity of those decisions right, so not to undermine the staff. And I sometimes actually it's a question of understanding, and sometimes you do get those decisions wrong, and you need to adjust them. And actually within that, if you get them too narrow, then you can really stifle opportunities. But I think the behaviour you just described about this sort of 4 a.m. leader doing this pretty much everything actually does a lot of damage to organisations, and they really undermine people in quite a dramatic way and make it actually very difficult for people to operate. So I think I cut my teeth at Lucas Automotive, which is a very structured environment where very, very rigorous. And I think in a lot of the tech firms, oddly enough, they've lost that rigour. There's a lot of hard work, but the rigour and the analysis and the critical thinking, it isn't really where I'd like to see it in a lot of these organisations.
And as a closing point, what advice would you give to a leader right now for themselves or for their business units they're helping, for the teams they're supporting, to help people get grittier in these times?
One bit of advice. I would go with humility. Just assume that you don't know the right answers and engage the team and listen to people's answers. And don't, do more time listening than speaking, and go through a bit of pain of not knowing necessarily, not having the right answer, not guessing, going in, listening to people and forming ideas from there.
I think that the leader's role primarily is to make sure there's a place for everything and make sure that isn't them. So when I'm watching reviews, I really make sure that things don't come back to me like a boomerang. I used to do that a lot. My early career was completely dominated by that. And I think the second thing is never to tell anybody what to do. No one ever does what they're told to do. It's the greatest misnomer. And it's the sort of very much what David said, that position of humility, and also recognizing that you don't know the answers. And I think, who actually, if you let somebody do something themselves, then who's actually the right judge for whether or not that's right or wrong? And actually, again, it can just be different. It's not right or wrong. It's just a different approach. And so I think it's about giving people the space to take their own approach and ask questions rather than tell them what to do. Because the minute you tell somebody what to do, you've completely lost it.
Totally agree there. Thank you, Tom and David, for your time today. It's always great catching up with you guys, and we've uncovered a few other topics we must explore, so let's get something in the diary for that pretty soon. To everyone at home, massive thanks to all the support for this growing channel. I know I speak for myself and Ollie, where we appreciate the feedback, the questions you're coming in. If you have one big question you want to put to one of our expert panels, please write in. We love the feedback so far. It's definitely directing this channel, and we want all of you guys to get as much value from this as we are doing it for you. But otherwise, thanks guys. Thanks to everyone at home. Have a great day, and we will see you all soon. All the best. Bye.